PLLradio.com. This is Wednesday, which means it is the day where you get to ask me anything, and I answer your questions when you ask me anything. The first question this week comes from a friend of a friend. So this question did not come directly to me. It came from a friend of mine who said that their friend had asked them the question to deliver to me. So, it was a question intended to me, but it didn't come directly to me. So the question is, federal law prohibits someone under the age of 21 from legally purchasing a handgun from an FFL dealer, FFL being the federal firearms licensee. However, some states set the minimum age at 18 to legally own a handgun. How does someone who is at least 18 but not yet 21 go about legally purchasing a handgun from a dealer? If a non-related person is at least 21, purchases it for them, or gifts it to them, would those be considered straw purchases? Just how can a person that is at least 18 but not 21 legally purchase a handgun from a dealer in states where it is legal for them to own one? Is it even possible? And yes, it is possible. Obviously, I have not read the gun statutes in all 50 states, but I do know from experience and, just some, I don't want to say general knowledge because it's not necessarily anything that everybody would know, but having had conversations with people in various states about how to go about doing some of these purchases that are not straw purchases. So, for instance, in New Hampshire, you can do a person-to-person transaction as long as you, either know the person, meaning that you know their character, you know that they are not a felon or otherwise restricted from owning or possessing firearms, or B, the person has a concealed carry permit. So that's one way that it could be done in New Hampshire. I'm sure that there are similar things in other states to where it can be done. And most of the time, you might not know somebody necessarily that has the exact firearm that you want to be able to purchase, and that's where gun shows come in. Because at gun shows, I realize that, there's a lot of people that they get all flustered about, well, there's the gun show loophole. Well, and that loophole that they're talking about is the supposed loophole that exists for any person-to-person transaction of a firearm. So, depending on what the laws are in your state regarding person-to-person transactions, then those would apply at gun shows as long as the person that is making the sale is not a federal firearms licensee. So, are you following me here? So, let's just say that I go to a gun show and I wish to purchase a firearm, and the person selling it says, well, I'm an FFL, I need you to fill out these papers. Then they would still have to do the background check. But if I just go to somebody and he happens to be a guy that, as a hobby buys and sells, a few weapons a month, then he, not being a FFL dealer, he would not be required to do the background check, but he still would be required to meet the other requirements in the state for the transfer of the firearm. So, for instance, in New Hampshire, unless the person knew me personally, they would ask me for my concealed carry permit, of which I do not have, because I don't think that you need, permissions from governments to be able to defend yourself. So I don't conceal carry. I actually don't really carry a firearm on me. I have a firearm, but I don't carry it on me in a concealed manner. And then there are various laws in different states about what constitutes concealed carry. if it's in your vehicle, is it concealed? Is it not concealed? Does it have to be visible? Can there be ammunition in the gun? Can the ammunition be in the magazine that is separate from the gun? So there's all sorts of requirements on that, and I would really encourage you to, if this is something that interests you, actually look up the laws in your state so that you don't run afoul and wind up getting gun charges and wind up being thrown in jail. There is a handy website, and I don't like the politics necessarily of this website, but they do have good information on the website. The website is smartgunlaws.org, and they actually show what the minimum age is in the various states to be able to purchase a handgun, purchase a long gun, which would be rifle, shotgun, or muzzle loader, the age for possession of a handgun, or the age of possession for a long gun. So there's that information, and of course they're trying to say that we need, stricter gun laws because blah blah blah. But they also have the information, minimum age for gun sales and transfers, and of course the thing about 21 only applies to FFL dealers. For handguns, it's 18 for a long gun, and someone who is not an FFL, currently under federal law, they can sell to someone who is at least 18 years of age. And again, as far as the straw purchase, because I realized that part of the question was about would this be considered a straw purchase? That depends on what the laws are in the jurisdiction. So in New Hampshire, I believe you must own the weapon for at least 1 year before you can transfer ownership, whether it be gifted to, well, you can gift it to a family member, I believe. But if you gift it to someone who is not a family member, you have to have the weapon for at least 1 year. If you sell it to someone who is not a family member, you have to own it for at least 1 year in order for it to not be a straw purchase. And that's something that changes jurisdiction to jurisdiction, state by state, in some cases. So hopefully that answers the question about the firearm, how someone who is 18 but not 21 can legally purchase a firearm. The next question comes from a friend of mine who recently published a book, How to Be a Hobo, and you can purchase that book from Amazon.com or your local bookstore, or if you have a Kindle device, you can purchase it for Kindle. And in the works is actually an audio version of that book, should be available by the end of March. So the question, actually, I will read the questions when we get back, but they're questions about Bitcoin, and it's something that I have covered in some respects in the past. I'll cover it more when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davy Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, "We aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience." Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. ExpressCoin is the best choice for buying Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin, and more. ExpressCoin prides themselves on their customer service, so much so that the back end on the website should allow them to be even more focused on your needs. Get your cryptocurrencies with money order, check, wire transfer, or cash deposit. Get started at expresscoin.fppradio.com. That's expresscoin.fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So I will get back to answering questions in just a second. But first, I want to make sure that I tell you about Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. For over 35 years, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling your investment-grade precious metals. They take Bitcoin for precious metals purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on investing and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 850-478-5270 or online at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. So the questions from Brooke, who is the author of How to Be a Hobo, she writes, my questions are about Bitcoin. I guess I really just don't understand it. There's not even a paper backing in your hand. It's just numbers on a computer screen. I've erased files and entire Facebook pages have been hijacked, and I no longer have control of my own image. How could it possibly be guaranteed to be there? Plus, with identity theft, couldn't people just erase your numbers and... I can't make out this next word. I think something was misspelled here. I think she was trying to say reapportion them into their own account. Even if there is not a high security doubt from the average hacker, what about the government? They seem to get into everything. So there are several levels to this question here. First, let me start off about the paper backing. So there are ways that you can do a paper wallet, and I've discussed this in a previous episode. I'll actually link to that episode in the show notes. That way you can listen. The question that I answered in the previous show was, what are some good ways to store Bitcoin, pros and cons of each? So I'll link over to that episode. That way I'm not rehashing everything in this episode about paper wallets and brain wallets, which are slightly different, but at the same time kind of similar. So there are ways to make sure that your Bitcoin are something other than, quote, unquote, just numbers on a computer screen. And yes, that you do have to worry in some respects about if you store the Bitcoin wallet on your computer, erasing the wallet or losing the private key, because every Bitcoin address, there's the public key, which is the address that you give out to other people so that they can send you funds, and then there's the private key, which is something that you keep to yourself. You make sure that you keep that secure. That way, if for some reason, let's just say that you have an account on blockchain.info, and you have your private keys to the wallets that are on blockchain, which is an online storage. You have your keys. If something ever happens to the blockchain website, then you could put your private key into another Bitcoin client, and you would then have access to the Bitcoin that were, stored, in quotes, stored on the website. Because in reality, Bitcoin aren't stored in a central location. They're stored on every computer that is running the client. So really, they're not stored anywhere, but at the same time, they're stored everywhere. because it's basically a bunch of ledgers. So as long as you have the key that says that I have access to this set of numbers on a computer screen, then you are able to do things with whatever is in that wallet. So there is some level of responsibility and accountability on the user, but at the same time, with, let me compare this to cash for a second. If I have, let's just say, $100 in my wallet, and I'm walking down the street and somebody comes and steals my wallet, well, there's not really anything that I can do to recover my wallet and the $100 cash that was in my wallet. And so with Bitcoin, there's the accountability and responsibility of the owner, the possessor, to make sure that he or she keeps that safe so that if something happens to it, that it can be recovered. There is another online, I guess online wallet would be the best way to describe it, even though they store most of the stuff offline, Coinbase. And I use Coinbase. I've used them for a long time, and I'm happy with the service that they provide. I realize that there are some people that are liberty-minded that don't really like Coinbase because Coinbase is abiding by government regulations, and I've heard that in some cases they're actually lobbying for implementation of regulations, but they are good at what they do. They provide a good service, and they actually insure the Bitcoin that are kept in Coinbase. So if you keep, let's just say, 2 Bitcoin in Coinbase, and something happens to where there's a hack on their servers and people take Bitcoin, they have insurance to basically pay you out to cover you for the amount of Bitcoin that is lost. And that's something that I don't know of any other Bitcoin storage company or Bitcoin wallet service that is doing that. So that alleviates a little bit of the concern about what happens if somebody steals the Bitcoin. But there's also the question in here about how could it possibly be guaranteed to be there, and that there's not really any guarantee that anything is going to be anywhere. For instance, I could go put valuable things in a safe deposit box at a bank, and, well, a robber could come in and empty out all of the safe deposit boxes overnight, and there's no guarantee that when I go there the next morning they didn't steal things. So that there's not really any guarantees that anything is going to be anywhere, even if it's put in a bank or a credit union or anything else, unless you physically do everything you can to protect it yourself. And that's what I encourage people to do with their Bitcoin, is to protect it themselves. And again, I'll link to the episode that I did a couple of weeks ago about the pros and cons of various ways to store Bitcoin. So let me skip down here. Even if there's not a high security doubt from the average hacker, what about government? And yes, that is always a concern. And last summer, you may recall or may not, depending on if you were paying attention to Bitcoin news, when the New York Department of Financial Services rolled out a proposal. Luckily, it never passed, but they rolled out a proposal that would have required every business that accepted Bitcoin that had a customer in New York to register and jump through hoops and hurdles of Know Your Customer. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com. Coinbase is a simple and secure online Bitcoin wallet for sending, receiving, and storing Bitcoin. Coinbase also allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin using a bank account or use their tools to accept Bitcoin as a merchant. Coinbase has more than 1 million consumer wallets and is trusted by over 25,000 merchants, including Overstock.com, Khan Academy, Reddit, and of course, FPP. Get started at coinbase.fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and Numery supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $3 per month or any amount of Bitcoin per month, thanks to the recurring payment options provided by Coinbase. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So, what about governments and Bitcoin? Can they take your Bitcoin? Do they know that the Bitcoin are yours? And that's really the question, right? Does anybody really own the Bitcoin, or do you just have control over the Bitcoin? And that's a question that governments are trying to answer right now. So the financial services regulators, FinCEN is their acronym, they have said that Bitcoin is money and should be regulated as such as far as their regulations go. So if you're doing third-party intermediary sort of Bitcoin acquisition, then you have to register as a money transmitter. And the IRS, which is another government agency, a very, very horrible government agency, they have said that Bitcoin is not money, but Bitcoin is property. So you treat it like gold or silver or any other investment, and you pay a capital gains tax on it at the end of the year. Or you depreciate the loss if you lost money on it. And then you have the Federal Elections Commission, the FEC, which has come out with a ruling saying that Bitcoin can be accepted by political campaigns, but it's limited to $100, and in some ways it's treated like cash, and in other ways it's treated like an in-kind contribution. And that way the paperwork balances out because you're putting it in one place here, and then you're subtracting it over here, and then it's left on a balance sheet in a third place, and somehow it all balances out. So you've got these basically conflicting federal regulations on what Bitcoin actually is. And again, because Bitcoin is not, unless you have a paper wallet, is not a physical, tangible thing, then do you really own it? Can I own a computer file that is not stored on my computer? How do you prove that I own the computer file that is not stored on my computer? And that is basically the same way that you are trying to, or at least the government is trying to answer the question about Bitcoin, is does Darryl Perry own a computer file that is not stored on Darryl's computer? And if he does, how do we prove it? And also, how do we try to tax him on this? And one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is that you are not limited to one Bitcoin wallet. And your identity is not necessarily tied to one Bitcoin wallet or more than one Bitcoin wallet if you have them. Of course, I do have a couple of Bitcoin wallets that can very easily be traced to Darryl Perry or Free Press Publications. And Coinbase has some of my information. That's true. They do. But again, that's because I want to be able to purchase Bitcoin from my bank account so that I can just press a couple keystrokes and then I purchase Bitcoin. So there are some ways that Bitcoin can be tied to a person. There are other wallets that I have that there is no way to know that I control that wallet. Now, of course, because you can go through the blockchain and all of the stuff is there because it is a big giant ledger, you can look and see, like, 2 steps back, Darryl sent money to this wallet. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I still control that money. It could be that I sent money to somebody that sent money to somebody else, and that's that third wallet. But let me talk just a little bit about this money transmitter thing, because the New York Department of Financial Services tried to not just regulate money transmitters, but every business that accepted Bitcoin if they had at least one customer in New York State. And there was a state rep here in New Hampshire that introduced a bill that would say that Bitcoin companies cannot be regulated as money transmitters. And I was at part of that legislative committee hearing. I found out about a week ago that the bill is likely going to be modified to basically wind up being a lot worse than what was intended, to basically reinforce current statute of anybody that is a third-party mediary of any value exchange is then a money transmitter. And one of the examples that was given during the legislative hearing, and I have to tell you this to stress how ludicrous the government regulators are. Let's say that questioner A, the person that asked me the question about the purchase of firearms, has some ducks. And the person that asked me the question about the Bitcoin has some chickens. And they want to trade those, but they don't necessarily know one another, but they both know me. And they're like, hey, I've got some chickens if you know anybody that's got some ducks. And the other person says, hey, I've got some ducks if you know anybody that's got some chickens. I'm like, as a matter of fact, I do. And I take the ducks and I take the chickens, and then I swap those to their respective owners. I have just transferred things of value as a third party based on some weird regulation somewhere that makes me a money transmitter. Although nobody in their wildest dreams would say that ducks and chickens are money. But that's just how screwed up government regulations are, that the person that helps two friends trade ducks and chickens becomes a money transmitter. And that's something that you are seeing with the Bitcoin, to where they're trying to say, at least the financial services regulators at the federal level are saying that if you sell Bitcoin through a third party, then that third party is a money transmitter. But the IRS is saying, it's not money, it's property. It's like gold and silver. But the FinCEN people, they have different regulations for gold and silver. And so that there is right now no consistency at the government level about how Bitcoin should even be looked at. Is it money? Is it not money? Is it property? But the real question is, do you actually own Bitcoin? And I would say no. You have control over. But because it is not something physically tangible in your hand or on your hard drive, and yes, I realize that there are ways that you can put a file on your hard drive or on a flash drive and then remove that from the computer. But the knowledge of that Bitcoin address exists outside of that hard drive or that flash drive or your computer. So really, the question comes down to, can you own a computer file that is not stored on your computer, your hard drive, your flash drive? And that is really the ultimate question about regulating Bitcoin. And I say no. I say you can't do it. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for new episodes online at fppradio.com.